Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a special Thursday today because the stay-at-home order from the federal side, not the state sides, but the federal side is supposed to be lifting today. So that's a big deal, and we got a story specifically about that. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about Bernie Sanders and his supporters. At least a quarter of his supporters, according to a recent poll, said that they're not sold on old Uncle Joe Biden. So we're going to talk about why and what that actually means. And then the government's corona response. We're going to talk specifically about Nashville, Tennessee, but I guarantee you, and this is especially if you live like where I live here outside of Gainesville, but in Gainesville, Florida, we're going to have a protest actually this weekend, I believe, about the government shutdown. If you live in an area that is controlled by Democrats, then expect a tax increase. And I'm not saying Republicans won't do it as well, but expect the response from Democrats to be raising your taxes. Even at the national level, they're already talking about that. So we'll get into that a bit. But we start with the end of the social distancing. It says here, this is a Politico story. End of Trump's social distancing rules spurs fears of virus rebound. So the virus is going to return. If we go back to work, it's interesting. If we go back to work, then the virus is going back to work with us, I suppose. The Trump administration's stay-at-home guidelines will quietly expire today, Thursday, with little fanfare, letting states decide what's next. Little fanfare. So I thought I'd look up the word fanfare in the context I believe they're using it here. And the definition was media attention or elaborate ceremony. Well, they had a parade in South Dakota, I believe it was yesterday, for their governor, because their governor never shut that state down. So, there are some fanfare for that, but little fanfare for opening up the economy. You know what troubles me is there was little fanfare, if you will, for shutting down the thing in the first place, that being the economy. If you're just new to my show, first of all, where you been? Secondly, howdy, how are you? Glad to have you. But I've been telling you for the last few weeks that my biggest concern about the reaction to the coronavirus has been how little debate we've actually had for giving up our constitutional rights. At least Bob Barr is warning about this, our a great attorney, Department of Justice Attorney General. He's at least warning about this, but there's been very little debate about how the restrictions that have been imposed upon us from the White House down to the outhouse. And so I'm not even letting President Trump off the hook on that. I am really disappointed in how little fanfare was actually given to shutting us down. I'm not really worried about fanfare in opening us up, but hey, that's just me. And oh, by the way, I'm not necessarily saying that some of the precautions that we've had to take, like social distancing and that type of thing, are not merited, and protective gear and all that kind of stuff. I just think that the government shutting us down and restricting and basically suspending our constitutional rights, like freedom of assembly and literally freedom of speech, has been suppressed even more during the coronavirus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But the fact that all of that was given up with very little fanfare troubles me a great deal. But as President Donald Trump repeatedly declares that we're opening our country again, the inconsistent patchwork of now listen to this, the inconsistent patchwork of state, local, and business decisions, making it exactly what could drive a second wave of coronavirus or potential prolong the current outbreak. Well, I guess you could be dead broke. If we don't get the economy reopened in a big way, we might not all die of coronavirus, but one thing's for sure, we'll all be dead broke eventually if we're not now. And many Americans are right this minute, and my heart goes out to them. Said Ann Suchat, The deputy director of the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, she said, it's going to take a long time for us to really wrestle this one down. The extent to which this disease is challenging is hard to overstate. Oh, well, I think they got our attention, don't you? I mean, I believe our attention has gotten. I don't believe that the American public for 1 second is not going to be cautious going forward. Are there going to be exceptions to that? Sure. Younger people especially, they are what they are. And so, yeah, they're going to be out there partying. I've seen evidence of it here in my own local community. But by and large, the American people are going to be very cautious going back out. Whether they should be or not is potentially debatable, but they are definitely going to be very cautious about that. The U.S. death toll is still rising, often by 1,500 to 2,000 a day, according to this article. And I don't doubt it. It's past 60,000 on Wednesday, according to Johns Hopkins University tracker. The case count is going up nearly half the state too, though it's an imperfect measurement because improved testing capacity means more people can be diagnosed. So the fact that we're testing more people, and oh, by the way, we're testing more people than any place on the planet right now. Those of you who have been demanding testing, you're getting your way, and I'm not opposed to testing. I do believe that it's overblown, the impact of it, but we need to know people infected and try to take care of it in that way. I don't have any problem with that aspect of it, but it is not the panacea for the whole thing, because you literally could be tested one day and infected the next. You could be infected going to get tested. So this idea that is the beginning and end all is the part I push back on. And the bottom line for me in all of this really is I want to face my fears and that standing up. I don't want to be cowering in a corner. If I have to wear protective gear and all that, so be it. But I don't want to be, I don't want to face this challenge in the corner. Public health experts expect another outbreak in the fall, possibly threatening a fragile economy and public confidence before the November election. Well, guarantee you this, some people are praying for just that. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that a lot of people are praying for people to die, but they're definitely praying for us not to come back economically. And they've made that pretty clear even before coronavirus. Remember, we've played this on the show before. If you want to see our podcast, by the way, the best way to do that is go to either on Facebook, go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it and share it with others. I'd greatly appreciate it if you would check us out on YouTube. You have to spell it all the way out, John Martin Talks. It'll pop up there. Eventually, if we get popular enough, it'll pop up as you're searching for it without spelling it all out. But we need more YouTube views, and we're up and running full speed now. So I'd appreciate that very much. Of course, you can check us out on America's Voice News Network in various ways. We broadcast on the Facebook page, but we're also on Roku, Fire Stick, Apple TV. Download the free app on Android or iPhone. We're on channel 219, Dish Network, and we're also on Pluto Network. So, and growing all the time. Greatly appreciate it. Check us out there. The White House unveiled the slow spread campaign in mid-March, and then Trump, after toying with lifting it prematurely, extended the stay-at-home effort through April. Large numbers of Americans did stay at home, helping to fight the spread of the disease. Now, that's actually becoming into debate. Not the fact that we've stayed at home, we certainly have, but whether or not that's actually ultimately prevented the spread of the disease is up for debate. Although, we're not having that debate because there's no debate allowed. I mean, there is no debate. You can't even make a joke on Facebook without getting put into Facebook jail like I found out myself. YouTube is snatching down videos. Twitter now is taking down any kind of memes against Joe Biden, so they don't want to laugh at it. So there's just no debate allowed. And believe me, there is debate among medical experts, believe it or not, about whether the stay-at-home stuff ultimately stops the spread of the virus. There are some people that believe that just the opposite is true, that it will increase the impact over a long period of time because of things like herd immunity won't happen. But you can't debate it. You have to accept it. Lock, stock, man. You have to just do it. John, and this reminded me of something when I was doing my little bit of research on this. I thought about something that John Stuart Mill, and I looked him up, and I remember the concept about it. He wrote a book in 1859 called On Liberty. And so he is, in a sense, one of our early fathers, not necessarily a founding father, but certainly a leader. And he coined the phrase tyranny of the majority. You may have heard that, and this is where it comes from, or tyranny of the masses, as it's sometimes called. And this is what his definition of tyranny of the majority was, and he warned against this. It is inherent, tyranny of the majority is inherent weakness to a majority rule in which the majority of the electorate pursues exclusively its own interest at the expense of those in the minority. This results in the oppression of minority groups comparable to that of a tyrant or a despot. And we're on that path here in the great United States of America. We're letting the majority thought, for instance, of the mainstream media take everything. The Democrats act like they're in the majority all the time, even if they're not. And we get a lot of bipartisanship sometimes. And bipartisanship, if you're just new to the show, you need to hear this. Bipartisanship, by definition, by JMT definition, is Republicans cave. Anytime you hear the word bipartisanship, I know what it's supposed to mean, but what it ultimately means is Republicans cave. Show me one example where the Republicans didn't want something, the Democrats or the Democrats didn't want something, and the Republicans did, and the Democrats caved into the Republicans and went the Republicans' way. It never ever happens. But tyranny of the majority, that is what we are facing right now. And we're also facing it through fear. If most Americans are fearful, then those of us it's not like we don't have fear. I'm taking all kind of precautions. I've got the wipes and do all this kind of stuff. I practice of the guidelines that they're talking about. I try to maintain social distance and all. I'm doing all of that out of respect for others and as, I guess, fear of the disease for me. I'll admit that. But I don't think that people that are willing to stand up and go to work should be the exception. They should be the rule. And it looks to me like some of the Democrats are trying to prevent you from exercising your right to provide for your family. As I've been saying the last few days, this term essential workers bothers me a great deal. Now, I'm not saying that it's not a knock on people labeled essential, like our first responders and our police, fire, military, and of course our great healthcare workers. I'm elevating them to the highest of high, including our truck drivers and many others, by the way. But if your job is necessary, no matter what it is, from the outhouse to the White House, from Park Avenue to Park Bench, so to speak, if your job is providing for you and your family, what could be more essential than that? But be on guard for tyranny of the majority. And stuff that the majority is for all the time is not necessarily a good thing. Keep in mind, some of the worst atrocities our country has experienced have been majority supported. Slavery, for one, at the time it was happening. Nicole Lowry, who served as Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response at HHS during the Obama administration, worries that the country still lacks an early warning system to detect emerging hotspots. Listen to what she says. She said, "How are we going to know we will miss totally when a second wave starts and things get worse? Once our hospitals start filling up, it's too late to head it off." Well, she may be right, but isn't that exactly what we just got through doing? Didn't we react when the virus reared its ugly head and people started getting sick? Didn't we actually react? The whole stay-at-home deal was not necessarily to prevent people from contracting the disease, certainly not, and not necessarily to prevent people from dying, because people are going to die. We're all going to die someday for sure. Some of us maybe today. I'm hoping not. But the purpose of the stay-at-home order was to flatten the curve. So what? So that hospitals wouldn't get overwhelmed. So if we did it in the lead up to this virus, Can't we do it if it rears its ugly head again? We've already proven the answer to that. We can. But as Donald Trump, according to this article, repeatedly declares that we're opening our country again, I love this part right here, the inconsistent patchwork of state, local, and business decisions making is exactly what could drive a second wave of the coronavirus or potentially prolong the current outbreak. So basically, if you go back to work, if we open the economy, if we go from being dead broke to at least being able to pay our bills, that is a direct threat to our health. And it may be for the coronavirus to return. But I like how they says here in this paragraph, inconsistent patchwork of state and local business decision making. Well, let me inform you snowflakes out there and the writer of this article. That inconsistent patchwork of state, local, and businesses decisions made this country the greatest country on earth. There's no question about that. The greatest country now, before, and the greatest country in the history as we know of this planet. Are we perfect? No. Well, you know why? Because we're run by human beings, and they all fall short of the glory, according to some little old book out there we might ought to get more familiar about. But this patchwork, as they call it, created the greatest nation on earth. The patchwork is the American people. That's what it is. And keep this in mind. Socialists have always been all about keeping the train on time. Big government. Big government's been, there you go, there's Mussolini. You know, he jumped in and sided with Hitler. But hey, he kept the trains running on time. That was a saying in Italy. I mean, millions of people got killed during World War II, put in concentration camps, real concentration camps, by the way, and brought to you by socialists. Nazis actually says socialism. But they kept the trains running on time. Socialists have always believed in big government, and right now is a socialist dream. They are using this, and Republicans too, fallen conservatives, even some of the elected officials. I don't know about the average rank and file American, but they're falling in line. And of course, in a sense, we are too. Without any debate, as I say, we're given to socialism because we want the trains to run on time. You know, we believe in big government. Big government, man, is the key to everything, right? Well, isn't that what the Tea Party was founded against? Well, the Tea Party was right, but they've been pushed aside by and large because government is on the verge of growing bigger than ever, even under President Trump. You know, maybe it's impossible to really drain the swamp. I can tell you it is being filled in. The swamp is literally the muddy water is pouring in, and the rats are running and feasting right now as much as ever, man. And if we ever have a chance to really drain the swamp, the only shot, and I'm not even saying it can be done then, but the only shot is Trump 2020, is to get on board the Trump train. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But the trains progressives have always been for trains running on time. You advancing yourself? Not so much. But freedom, let me just tell you this, ladies and gentlemen. Freedom has always been a risky business. It's never been free. There's always a price to pay. And as I've been talking about our founding fathers a lot lately, and it's kind of one of the themes of my show, Ben Franklin, one of my favorite founding fathers. People talk about collecting dead presidents. I'd rather have dead inventors. They're worth a bit more. But right there, people willing to trade their freedom for security will receive neither. Truer words have never been spoken, and they're as much to the point today as they ever have been. Freedom is never free. And here's the thing, is our challenge really any greater than other generations of Americans? I mean, I understand coronavirus. I'm not downplaying it. People are getting sick. People are dying. It is a real deal. But is our challenge as Americans any greater than any other generation? Name me a generation that hasn't had some type of challenge. And with all due respect, I get the memes and stuff I see on Facebook of and I feel for the 2020 graduates from high school and college. You know, I know that people graduating high school won't have their prom and all that kind of thing. And man, that was a big deal to me then. So I get it. It's a big deal now. But keep in mind, there was a time not too long ago when your senior trip would have been to Vietnam. So, and before that, name me a generation, I'll say it again, because if I say it, it bears repeating. Name me a generation who hasn't had a challenge. If this is the challenge of our times, are we not going to rise up to it? I believe we can, and I believe we will. And that's one thing that I think is missing a bit. Now, the only ones talking about it are people like President Trump and some other governors, like our great governor here, Ron DeSantis. He's opening us up a little bit by Monday, but they're not doing haircuts and beauty parlors, by the way. And so I'm going to have to break down and get my wife to cut my hair over the weekend. She said she would because, I think I'm getting a little bit woolly. But the challenge to the American people, that's what we kind of need. And I know it's difficult to do that in this particular time, but if anything, we need to challenge our people to face our fears and get this economy get back to work. It'll be better for everybody. Could it spike the coronavirus cases? Sure. And we need to deal with that. But to cower in the corner and demand security at the expense of our freedom, as old Benny there said, we'll end up with neither. All right, we're going to move on to kind of an election issue, and this is about the Bernie bros. Those of you feeling the burn, if you still are, and whether or not what you're going to do come election 2020. This is from USA Today poll. Nearly 1 in 4 Sanders supporters not on board yet with voting for Biden. Nearly 1 in 4 Sanders supporters, 22%, said they would vote for a third-party candidate, vote for President Trump, or not vote in November. We'll break these numbers down in just a second. Or were undecided about who to vote for, according to USA Today Suffolk poll. When broken down, 2% said they would vote for Trump. If they're willing to say they're going to vote for Trump, it's probably even higher, but it's guaranteed that they're going to do it if they're willing to say that publicly. 8% said they would vote for a third-party candidate. Who might that be? That Justin Amash? I don't take him very serious. I don't think he's going to hurt the president at all. May actually help him. 2% said they would skip voting. I believe that number actually might be even higher. And 8% said they're still undecided. Undecided. Wow, really? You're undecided right now? The bottom line is if these numbers actually hold true into November, and I'm not saying they will, Trump's going to win if they hold true. And so the Democrats, they don't talk about it much, but they're a bit in a panic. It points out, though, and rightfully so, the vast majority of Sanders voters, 77%, said they will vote for Biden in the general election in November. And my question to you, Bernieites out there, if you're going to vote for Joe Biden, my question is why? Name me a reason. Is it just purely Trump derangement syndrome? Because that's the only reason to vote for Joe Biden. You can't possibly believe that he's mentally capable of being president. And of course, those of you in the hashtag Me Too movement, what about that? Joe Biden is still under some suspicion there. Did you see where Stacey Abrams came out and says, I believe Joe Biden, and the New York Times has talking about this Tara Reid deal, this sexual assault allegation against Biden. She said, I believe Joe, and on top of that, this is the new talking point, this next part for the Democratic Party right now. The New York Times investigated and said there basically was nothing to see there, that they didn't believe the allegation was true. And she said, well, she believes the New York Times. But the problem with that is if you go back, there's video, and I could have played it, maybe we'll play it another day, but where she actually said in conjunction with the Kavanaugh case, when asked about the New York Times that actually had an article back then that basically said that they didn't think Kavanaugh was necessarily guilty of any of this. And she said that the New York Times is not the FBI, and without an FBI investigation, it doesn't really matter what the New York Times said. But, the standard now, I guess, is different. Sanders said in and by the way, I want to play this video. We play this pretty regular on the show, but I don't think we can get enough of it. If you're undecided or you're committed to voting for Joe Biden, before you actually cast that vote, you should be made to watch this video on a 24-hour continuous loop with your eyes taped shut or somebody slapping you for sleep deprivation, keeping you alive, awake to watch this video, and then tell me how you could possibly vote for this guy after this video.
And by the way, you know, I got hairy legs that turn turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
I bet he does. And that is an actual, even though it's an animation, that is really a part of the popcorn speech that Biden gave at a pool dedication a couple of years ago. I mean, how you could vote for a guy that literally says that. You mean some of you roaches out there, and roaches are actually, you know, he's not even been asked about that. So I believe he's just saying that basically, you know, young black kids are little roaches. That's what it sounds like to me. But he's never even been asked to explain yourself. Never even been asked to that, let alone a question about this attack on Miss Reed. Sanders said at a recent interview with the Associated Press, because Bernie's all in apparently for Joe Biden. Of course, he was all in for Hillary. Bernie was always going to sell out. I hate to tell you, Bernieites, Bernie was always going to sell out. And if you want an example of why I've said this, not only what he did in 2016 with Hillary Clinton, but go to 2018 and what he did with Ocasio-Cortez. And you're going, well, what, Ocasio-Cortez? Bernie didn't support Ocasio-Cortez. Bernie actively campaigned against her. He campaigned for the 20-some year Crowley, incumbent Crowley, a 26 years, something, over 20-year incumbent that I give Ocasio-Cortez credit for beating. I mean, she worked her little behind off. I don't agree with her, but she absolutely wore her shoes out literally. But Bernie was not supporting Ocasio-Cortez. He didn't get on the AOC bandwagon until, guess what? After she won. So Bernie's always been an establishment guy. Always. He's not a revolutionary. He talks it, but he don't walk it. But getting back to this, says, I believe, this is what Bernie said, I believe that it's irresponsible for anybody to say, well, I disagree with Joe Biden, and therefore I'm not going to be involved. Well, isn't the opposite true? I mean, I'm trying to understand this. Help me out. Chime in on Facebook, wherever you're at. Good morning, Citizens for Trump. Howdy, how are you? Media Measures, America's Voice News. Chime in, because you know by now, if you chime in on Facebook, it may take me a little while. We're getting hundreds of comments now, but I will come back and respond to you the best I can. But Bernie said, I believe that it's irresponsible for anybody to say, well, I disagree with Joe Biden, and therefore I'm not going to be involved. Help me, please. Because isn't it the opposite true? If you disagree with the guy, then you shouldn't be supportive of him. And I'm not saying on one or two particular issues, but if he's making a blanket statement that you can disagree with Joe Biden, he's telling his supporters, I don't care if you disagree with Joe or not, get in lockstep, man. And there's a meme that I pulled up that kind of shows this right there. If sheep could vote, they'd pick the guy who feeds them, even if that person later was the one that leads you to slaughter. And I say this to the Bernie bros out there and the Bernieites and those feeling the burn. Let me tell you, I'm not saying necessarily you should support President Trump. I think you should, and I can make a strong case for you. But if you're anti-establishment, if you want something to actually change, if you want Washington to actually look at the American people and not kowtow to corporate America like Bernie always saying, and I agree with Bernie, by the way, on that aspect of it. Well, the last person in the world you want to vote for is Joe Biden. I mean, you can make a case that Donald Trump stands up for big business. I actually think he stands up for business, period. So I get you may have some issues with Donald Trump, but Joe Biden, look who he actually stands up for. Credit card companies, the big institutions, the big banks, all of that. Everything that Bernie campaigned against, and oh, by the way, old Elizabeth Warren, Wapa, she's the same way. Biden is the kingpin of big business. He's all about it. So this idea that you don't want to support someone who's all in for the establishment and the biggest corporate raiders in America, well then, if that's your position, there's no way you should vote for Joe Biden. But of course, Bernie's telling you because he's a sellout, he wants another home, maybe out in California or something. That's why. Wake up, get woke. Despite Biden and Sanders working together to win over the Vermont senator's supporters, the majority of them are not enthused by Biden. Well, I got a question for you. It's not limited to Bernie supporters. Who is actually enthused for Joe Biden? Please tell me if you are enthused for Joe Biden, why? And please leave out, my son brought this up to me. We were talking yesterday. Can you say in a paragraph or two why you support Joe Biden for president without mentioning Donald Trump's name? And I understand that you got, whoever you're for, if it's not the president, you want to defeat him. I get that. But can you tell me why you support Joe Biden? And I'd love to hear any of these people like Bernie Sanders, for instance, why they would endorse Biden for president without mentioning Donald Trump's name. I don't know that it can be done. I have not yet heard anyone make a passionate plea for Joe Biden. I've heard them make passionate anti-Trump stuff on a daily basis, but passionate pro-Biden, I've not heard one. Maybe you have. A combined 60% of Biden supporters are not excited at all for Biden's pending nomination, according to this poll, while a combined 38% said they were very or somewhat excited. Well, getting back to what I was just talking about, the Democrats' entire campaign. Now, I understand trying to get the incumbent out. I get that. That should be part of every campaign. If you're actually running for president, you obviously want to get whoever's in there out and replace that person. I understand. That's pure politics. Get that. But the Democrats' entire campaign, and the only reason bloated Joe Biden, because I said he's dead, still dead, they just grabbed him in the floating when they're drowning in the anti-Trump. But their entire campaign is simply anti-Trump. Is that enough to win? I guess we'll see. Don't you actually have to be for something? Statistics generally show you have to be for something. You can't just motivate people by being against something. As President Trump's campaign, even if you don't like the guy, you have to admit it was all about what he was for. And I can tell you right now, I could go for a solid hour telling you why I am for Mr. Trump without ever mentioning anybody else's name. Could you go 2 seconds about Joe Biden without mentioning someone else's name? I doubt it. Bernie bros want a movement. Now they're saying they're all about a movement, right? Isn't that what Bernie's always, we're a movement. Well, the only movement that Joe Biden is going to have, well, it depends. Literally, whether he depends. He may need help with a movement. But there is a movement out there. If you want to be a revolutionary, you Bernie bros out there, you Bernie supporters, if you want a true revolution, we already have one. You may or may not agree with all of it, but it is a revolution nonetheless. And that is the Trump train revolution, baby. Woo-hoo! Get on the Trump train. If you want to be something that's anti-establishment, that's your guy right there. It already exists. You don't have to recreate it. All right, we're going to move along here to our next story and our last one here. And this comes out of Nashville, Channel 5 News, so I want to give them credit. Mayor Cooper, and I don't know squat about the dude other than he's a Democrat. I knew that without even looking it up, but I looked it up to make sure. Mayor Cooper's proposed budget includes a 32% property tax increase. And I bring this up not just about Nashville, although I got a lot of fans in Tennessee. My oldest brother's, God rest his soul, all his extended family is in Tennessee. I got a lot of good people, a lot of good friends up there, and I love Tennessee. It's one of the, I say this right off the bat, Tennessee, if you haven't been there, you ought to check it out. Tennessee is one of the most beautiful states in the nation. There's really little argument to that. And we got a lot of beautiful places, so I don't say that lightly. But Tennessee, and the seasonal changes there, incredible. But I bring this story up not because it's related to Tennessee, because it's happening where you are, or it's going to happen. If you have a progressive city or county commission or state legislature, basically one controlled by Democrats, because they're one and the same these days. And before I say this, let me say again, I'm not saying some Republicans won't do the same thing, but I guarantee you all the Democrats are going to hit you with a tax increase. They're campaigning for it for president, for God's sakes, let alone your local. I mean, Biden just the other day came out and said that we wanted enough gunpowder to blow up President Trump's tax breaks. You know, the crumbs that you guys got, that Nancy Pelosi said when she heard people were going to get an average of $1,000 to $2,000 back, average Americans, remember what she's called it? Crumbs. Yeah, they want your crumbs away. But I guarantee you, if you're led by a progressive, which is Democrats and progressive leaders, it's just the same. Not all you Democrats are progressive, I realize that, but all the elected ones are, without a doubt, it seems like. Nashville here. Mayor John Cooper filed his recommended budget for the 2021 fiscal year with Metro Council. The $2.447 billion budget, so there's no small potatoes in Nashville, includes raising the city's property tax by almost 32% to recover from financial impact of the March tornado, that's somewhat, and the COVID-19 shutdown. 32%. Now, it reminds me of, I was taking a young man to work the other day, and he's been working construction, so he's in an essential job, which you know how I feel about that term. And he was talking about how he had witnessed the free school lunch programs that are happening all over the country. I'm sure they're pretty much everywhere, where even during the school shutdowns, people can come get a free lunch and in many cases a free breakfast. And he said they weren't even asking people, you know, whether they needed it or not. They were just handing them out. People say, how many I got? 4, whatever, they handed them out. And before I finish, I want to say up front, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. If you're going to have a free lunch program, I can understand people can become dependent upon it, which is a word I don't like to use very often. But my big issue with it was he was talking about how great it was. And this young man in particular, I've kind of been mentoring him a little bit on, because he's not really very political, but he starts asking me questions because he knows that I don't push it on him. I just answer his questions. And he talked about how, you know, his money and tax returns and everything else on previous. And I said to him, you do realize that you're paying for that, right? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, who do you think is paying for that free lunch? Because there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somebody is paying for it. He said, well, the schools are. And I said, but who do you think pays for the schools? And I'm not bemoaning this, but it's taxpayer money. It's not a school provided lunch. It's a taxpayer provided lunch. Government, he finally understood. I said, government doesn't produce squat. He said, well, where does taxpayer money come from? I said, it comes from you. You're working, you're paying for that lunch. Now, if you want to pay for it, that's fine. But don't think for a second that you're not paying for that free lunch. And most people don't say, it's amazing, I won't say most, but it's amazing how many people don't seem to understand that the government produces squadoosh. We pay for everything. If you're a tax-paying person, you pay for everything. So somebody, and even property taxes, you're paying property taxes even if you don't own property. Because if you rent a place, the amount that you think that you're paying a certain amount of rent and that somehow you're exempt from paying the cost of the taxes on that property, it's being passed pretty much directly on to you. So if you live in a property, unless you're living on the street, heck, we paying for that too. That, everybody pays, in a sense, property tax, whether you do it directly or not. But I like this. It said the Metro Finance Department, this is back to Nashville, estimates that the city will experience an estimated revenue decline of more than $470 million due to the combination of the tornado and the pandemic. And why is that? Why are they having a shortfall? Because you're having a shortfall. That's why. Your revenue, you, the American people, in this case, citizens of Nashville, your amount of money is dropping. So therefore, the government's amount of money is dropping. But they can't have that. They're not worried about how much your income is dropping or if you have any at all. They're just worried about keeping their stuff going. The decline in revenue, let me check my time, doing pretty good. The decline in revenue during quarter 4 of the 2020 fiscal year forced Metro to cut expenditures and spend down remaining fund balances, leaving poor little old Metro with only $12 million of fund balances. Well, let me ask you this. If you're not working right now, and even if you are maybe, how much are your fund balances down? I mean, if you have stocks, I mean, of course, they're rebounding now, but if you have a 401k, which is your fund balance, how much has it been down over the last couple of months? They don't care about that. The government that is for the people and by the people don't give a tinker's hoot about the people. It's pretty obvious. Said Mayor Cooper, and of course he's a Democrat, this is unprecedented and difficult time for all Nashvillians. Probably is. Thousands of residents have lost their jobs during the pandemic, and this is the mayor, and that makes the necessary decision to raise taxes all the more difficult. Yeah? Really? How about as much difficult, is your decision as difficult as those who are trying to figure out how the heck they're going to pay for it? I mean, it's just the mindset that somehow the citizens are struggling to make it. And the solution is to put more burden on their back. That is big government, big time progressive, pretty much Democrats across the board. That is their response to that. And as he said, as I mentioned during the State of the Metro, this is back to the Mayor Cooper of Nashville, Metro address, and this could be happening anywhere in the country. The city has thinned its cash reserves to the point where we find ourselves without a rainy day fund during a stormy season. How much is your rainy day fund? Do you realize that the average American before this crisis was actually 2 paychecks away from being basically unable to pay their bills and on the street, according to every polling out there? It says this is a crisis budget. This is what this mayor is saying. It's a crisis budget, not a discretionary budget. That will ensure Metro and Metro Nashville public schools can continue to meet our community's needs. In other words, what he's saying is we're having a crisis in maintaining the current level of government. And so we've got to raise your taxes to maintain government. There's no sense of letting government shrink as your money goes down, as your property value goes down. There's no sense that their stuff should go down. It's got to be maintained and grown. Government's never really maintained. It always grows, right? Cooper said that 32% property tax hike would bring the current rate of $3.155 up to $4.155, in other words, the mill rate, which is still the lowest property tax of all major Tennessee cities. A homeowner would pay an extra $750 a year for a $300,000 home, and this is what gets me. They say in this article, the last property tax increase in Metro Nashville was 2012. I got a real problem with this, and maybe why I didn't get elected here. Why should property taxes ever be increased? Now, see, a lot of people don't really understand property taxes. Property tax is done with a millage rate. It basically, they raise the millage rate. It raises the amount of money they can take based on the value of your property. And here's why I say property tax. Let me check my time. I can get this explained. Why property taxes should never be raised. Because they should be used as a gauge of the health of the local economy. But this is a concept that's totally foreign to most, if not all, elected officials, especially progressives. When property values are going up, in other words, things are booming and property values are going up, if let's say the millage rate is 3, well, if your property goes from $100,000 to $200,000, they're going to make more money without raising the property tax because your property value is higher. So you're doing better. So then you could make a case, well, then we need to take this time to have more money in government. But the reverse is also true. When your property value goes down, in other words, your economy, your community is going down, then maybe expenditures should go down as well at the government level. But government solution is to raise the rates when your property is going down. They must maintain, so they raise the rate on you to keep that maintenance, even though your valuation is dropping. Theirs never does. And when the values go back up, do they ever turn around and lower the taxes back down? Hardly ever, if ever. So to me, property taxes are the perfect gauge for the economy. When the economy's doing well, the properties goes up, the government takes in more money. They can spend things on pet projects. When the economy is in the tank and your valuation is going down, it's a sign for government to tighten their belt. They're never going to do that. It's beyond their comprehension. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Facebook page, like it, and share it with others. I will continue to pray for your family. You pray for mine. But above all else, like I say each and every day, have a blessed day.